Good evening and welcome. I'm your host, Mary Davis, and the show, of course, is the Mary Davis Show. And I think we have a great show for you today and a couple of new guests, at least one who has never been on the show and two who has not been on here in a while. But the third one you're pretty well aware of. She's a local celebrity here in our town, and that's Dr. Barbara Nevergo. She's on the Buffalo School Board. But Mr. Bowman, who is one of our main speakers today, is coming to us from the Bronx. He has been in Buffalo on a very important show that took place on Saturday morning here in Buffalo at the Meriwether Library. And he is on set with us today to talk about some of that. Principal Jamal Bowman is at the Cornerstone Academy for Social Action, or CASA, which is a short name for it, in the Bronx, has had positive experience teaching to the whole child and not to the test. He knows Common Core and its impact on learning and teaching. He questions the lack of music, art, social studies, and physical education on the overall learning experience of children. Oh, and that's kind of left like me out in the middle of what I was getting ready to talk about, Mr. Bowman. Thank you. Social studies and physical education on the overall learning experience of children. Parents have the right to refuse the New York State Common Core test in grades 3 through 8. You, your child, and teachers do not get specific results from the test, so they do not assist your child's learning. The tests do not provide useful information for developing your child's strength and meeting their needs. Students sit for 9 hours of testing and could be subjected to 18 hours of testing. 9 and 18 hours are longer than a New York State bar exam for lawyers. Remember, you can refuse to allow your child to take the test, and that is what our program is on about tonight. And first we'll go to Mr. Bowman, and I have each of our guests, although you can probably see who they are running under their pictures, but we'll get them to talk about it well. Mr. Bowman, why don't we go to you first? Who are you? What do you do? I've already said that, but maybe you can embellish it a little more.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here in Buffalo. This is my second time in Buffalo.
Welcome.
I'm consistently enjoying myself, hanging out with Dr. Nevergo, Keith, and Kathy, so I'm happy to be here. I've been in public education for 16 years. I have experience in K-12 settings. I have experience in both public and district and charter schools. And based on my experiences, both personal and professional, and what I've learned and what I've seen, I believe a whole child approach to teaching and learning is where our public schools need to go, as opposed to the top-down singular measure approach that we're using now. So right now, our students are assessed in English and math in grades 3 through 8, and as you mentioned, they take at least 9 hours of testing every year, sometimes 18 hours if they're a special needs student or English language learner. My approach, or what I advocate for, is a more holistic approach, a more aesthetic learning approach, where students learn through exploration, learn through building, learn through designing, learn through collaboration. Definitely the arts are included in that, particularly music, theater, spoken word, and so forth. And it's all about using multiple measures, because our children are different. All children develop at different rates and have different interests and different passions and different purpose, and a different purpose for doing what they do. And it's the educator's job to create a nurturing environment that cultivates those differences. And that's what I advocate for.
Barbara, you are second educator here. Let's go to you. And what do you think about all this Common Core as well as opt-in or opt-out?
Yeah, well, Mary, for some time, especially since I've been on the school board and have had an opportunity to look at the test and to really examine what the tests are like and what they're measuring. Since the advent of Common Core in particular, the tests are really developmentally inappropriate for the children that are being tested. So, for example, a child in 3rd grade may be given a reading test, an English language learning test, that really reads at the 5th or the 6th grade level.
Well, how
You know,
does this
that's not
happen?
fair.
I mean, when they make these tests, don't they sort of look at actual children and test them out on kids?
Well, they do
No.
field tests.
No, they don't.
Yeah, supposedly, I think Jamal answered it very succinctly, no. No, I mean, the problem with the test is that it's standardized, and so the same test is given to every child, whether that child has special needs, whether that child speaks English fluently or not, you know, whether that child has other kinds of accommodations that need to be made for them. That's why the span of the you know, number of hours that they could sit for the test is so great. So you have one test that's trying to assess every single child the same way when we know children don't learn the same way. That's what's wrong. That's one of the major things that's wrong with the test.
And what about you? We'll go to Keith. You're a parent. Keith's a parent, an activist, and as we put down there, an actress and a parent too.
Well, my thing is, it's not that, see, a lot of people want to try to say that we're against testing. We're not against testing, because you have to do some tests to see how a kid is doing in school. But we're against these type of tests because they're ineffective. They're not based on, you know, the one thing about it, the teachers will never be able to see the scores of the kids anyway, or that they're teaching. The Common Core and all this, and the New York State keeps all that testing. So how could it be used as a measure of assessing our children? And me as a parent, how can I endorse something that's going to be ineffective and engaging the progress of my child? Because from what they're teaching our children now, it's not, you know, how you going to know where you come from? I mean, how you going to succeed and know where you come from if you don't be taught history? They done took all that out of the question. Science. You have a STEM program in certain schools. My daughter happened to be in that at 53. But you're not even testing them or teaching them about STEM. You're trying to teach them to pass English and math. And it's, you know, it's a faulty curriculum.
And what about you, Kathy? Because Kathy, you are a parent as well, I believe.
No, I'm not a parent, but I am a concerned citizen and activist here in Buffalo,
Okay.
fighting for the equal right to education for all.
So an education activist.
And I think one of the most important things is the tests are designed actually to increase inequality in our schools in a situation where they're already unequal. They're segregated. The Buffalo schools in particular don't get the funding that they should, and instead we spend millions of dollars. I believe the contract was $35 million for, it's a private company that makes these tests. It's not teachers and educators who make them. And they are designed to say that our children are failures, and the children are not failures. They have all kinds of different ways in which they can succeed and develop, and those things are not tested. So for example, you know, Buffalo's known South Park won the football championship. That's not part of the testing. The music is not part of the testing. 100% of Buffalo students in a music program have graduated, but yet music's one of the things being cut in order to do more time for the testing. And it's basically math and English that are tested. And as well, it's very unfair for English language learners. Buffalo has an increasing population of students who are coming in. It's usually called English as a second language. Many of these students actually speak 3 and 4 languages coming here. They just don't speak English. So they're actually quite cultured as students, but they're forced to take a test in English. If all of us were given a test in Arabic or Korean, we would fail.
Say that.
And that's what it's designed to do, and to also to literally harm all of these children.
Well, this is one thing, a question I didn't ask. I know our guests will probably ask it too. Will you opt in or opt out? Teaching to the state test or teaching the whole child? More learning and less testing? The choice is yours. And I hope that by the end of this program, many parents will be able to make that choice, one way or the other. Mr. Bowman, we're back to you.
Yes.
Enlighten us with some pearls of wisdom here.
Well, most importantly, parents need to know that they have a right to choose. Many parents aren't even aware that they have that right.
So they can opt out.
Correct.
They can say, no, I'm not going to do this.
They
test.
can choose to not allow their child to take the exams, yes. So number one is informing them that they do have the right to choose. Number two is for parents to be empowered, not just with that right, but to understand that they should not be intimidated by a teacher, a principal, or superintendent, because we've heard many cases in which parents are being threatened and students are being threatened, being told that if the student doesn't take the exam, they'll may be held over. That is not true. They've been told that schools would lose funding if the child doesn't take the test. That is also not true. So there are a lot of threats out there related to opting out. So parents need to know that these threats are false, they're frivolous, and there are many sort of sleeper cells in you, if you will, in different aspects of public education, still trying to promote the usage of these exams as measurements for our students. And because they're still there, they're using any method necessary to make sure that children take the test, all in the way to disempower parents.
Well, Barbara, you have grandchildren in the system, and Keith, you have a daughter in the
Yes.
system. Are you opting out or opting in? Or are you?
I'm no, having my daughter opt out. I'm encouraging all parents to have them to opt out because it's something that, I mean, they say it's it comes in as an evaluating tool, but now the Common Core Task Force and all that is saying they're not going to use the scores for evaluating teachers and principals, but they didn't put students in that. But we all know that they're going to use that data to evaluate our children. But they say they added they shrunk the test or something, or they giving you more time. They only removed 2 questions, but then there's no certain score. So just say our Buffalo Public Schools, they get a score of 65, and that's supposed to be good. You know they're going to raise the bar to 75 so that it still look like there's failing schools and all that. And it's not a level playing field. And then if it's something for the parents to really look at. If you have the suburban schools opting out, why is they still trying to push it for the Buffalo Public Schools?
Question, I have no idea the answer. Mr. Bowman, you know, this what can parents do? We know the parents around this table and people involved around this table are activists in education. So they have a plan on what to do. But what can you do? Obviously, something you're doing now is you're trying to get your message out, and that's a good point. You got people like Dr. Nervigal, who's on the school board, and hoping we can stay her there, but there's a lot of enemies on the school board, too, and they don't look like Dr. Bowman and me and Dr. Nervigal. You know, we know that they're there. But what we're trying to say, and that does not include Kathy, who's a strong advocate, but you know, what we are trying to find is what else can you do, or what are parents and teachers and even students doing to fight this? There's got to be blowback.
Yeah,
What is it?
so the concept of each one teach one really rings true here. If you look at 2014, New York State only had 80,000 opt-outs. Not only, but that's a lot, 80,000 opt-outs. But in 2015, the number jumped to 240,000 opt-outs.
That's a big jump.
It's a huge jump.
Over twice.
So parents are learning more. Parents are becoming more engaged. Parents are getting more involved. So attending school board meetings, talking to other parents, asking questions. The more you learn, the more empowered, the more knowledge you have, the more empowered you are. So it's about one-on-one conversations, venues like this television show, the venue that we had early in the library. It's about each one teach one and getting the word out in that way. But it's baby steps, right? Because for every parent, their pathway toward opting out or opting in is different. But the more you know, the more empowered you feel and make the decision. And for me, that's the biggest thing. It's been a top-down system for far too long, and the most vulnerable kids continue to suffer. The only way to meet the needs of every child, vulnerable or not, is for parents' voice to be heard and magnified. The parent voice is the most important voice in public education.
Kathy, you're an education activist. What are you doing? I mean, what are you helping? What do you suggest?
She got me out here twice.
All right, she's doing her job, okay.
All right, that was one. That was an important one. But
I was going to ask Mr. Bowman, you know, are you moving around to other places other than Buffalo? Every place obviously
yes.
have a Kathy.
actually, probably they do. But one of the things is encouraging everyone to get informed and not to rely on the Buffalo News for your information. There's a number of websites that you can go to. One's called NYSAPE, NYSAPE.org. Western New Yorkers for Public Education, that's WNYFOR publiced.org. They have a lot of information about what to do and why the tests are what many parents across the state consider actual child abuse. And in fact, in Long Island, the doctors have designated it as a Common Core syndrome because the level of anxiety among the children, and they're throwing up, and they're just, it's very upsetting to a lot of people. We heard a story at the meeting on Saturday of a young student for ESL who's didn't want to take the test and was forced basically by the principal to do so, and he's just crying because he knows it's not fair. It's to him. It's not fair to any of the ESLs. And we also are organizing. We've organized a number of demonstrations, public forums, so that everybody has a chance to participate in the discussion. I encourage everyone to have as much discussion with your peers, your teachers, and your fellow parents, your co-workers, on the issues, because it's designed basically to get us to all agree to something that we feel is wrong. The students
What's the
to agree,
difference
the parents
between the
agree.
core situation and SAT's test? I hear everybody go, I got to take the SAT.
Well, the SAT is
Is that more of a high school
It's
and
a
going
high
to
school
college?
test to determine a criteria for admissions to college. And we're talking primarily about elementary school
Okay.
and grades 3 through 8
So that's a
for,
whole
for this
difference.
particular test, right? And I'd like to say, we keep talking about parents, and that to stress that this is a parent movement, that this is a movement that was initiated, fueled, and continued to be pushed by parents. Teachers are involved as well, many of whom are parents too. But one of the arguments against this whole movement, against opt-out, is that this is a union-led movement, and that's not true.
Well, so what if it
That's
is? What's wrong with unions?
Well, because there's certain people who want to demonize unions, who want to say that unions are, and because there's a certain part of this whole Common Core and testing
I don't think
that
you've
is
ever heard of the
designed
8-hour
to.
day. I
That
don't
is
think you've ever heard of the 8-hour day.
Well, unions are under attack. That's very clear. Unions are under attack wherever, whether they're public service or private
Well,
unions,
private
they're
unions,
under attack.
they're very
If
certain
I could
because
just-
they carry a lot of weight.
If I could just add on that, we've worked very hard in Buffalo to unite the parents and the teachers together in this fight, because it belongs to all of us, and to not allow these efforts to demonize the unions, as she was bringing out, to hold sway. And generally speaking, in our experience with the parents, and we've done all kinds of interviews door to door, when we ask that, what do you like best about your schools? The large majority of parents say our teachers. And
What's
so
wrong
that's
with
not,
that,
the
Mr.
teachers aren't the
Bowman?
problem.
Is there a problem in I don't think you teach actively anymore, Barbara. You may, but I'm not sure if you do or not. But for Mr. Bo, isn't there a problem that white teachers would be, what made you get interested? Is there something like, well, they may go after tenure, maybe that might be a problem that teachers could have, or different other things, than say, if you get too active, we're going to clip your wings a bit.
Yeah, and that's the culture of fear within our bureaucracy, within our public ed bureaucracy that has existed for far too long. I've gotten into this because I want more for our children. There's so much more that we can have, and there's so much more that we can do, and we just need to open our minds to all the possibilities that can occur within a public school setting. We need more imagination, we need more innovation, we need more creativity to produce a truly progressive ed reform, if I use the words small r, not big R, ed reform agenda. If we truly want to be progressive, we have to incorporate the whole child, the whole mind, and all things that are possible. Every child is born with innate gifts that they can share with the world to impact and change the world. And it's our job as the adults to cultivate those gifts and that genius. We're not doing that. So if the governor or our mayor in New York City or city officials here would push a true whole child reform agenda, I would be on board with that. But what they're doing is they're doubling down on the over-testing, just like they did when we transitioned to the Common Core in 2013. They doubled down from No Child Left Behind to the Common Core, then they doubled down to Race to the Top, and now they're doubling down again. And all along the way, the achievement gap continues to grow. So we're still not meeting the
I think one of the key words you
needs.
said was progressive, but here in Buffalo, I would imagine that the Buffalo Board of Education would have a lot to do. And I don't think the word progressive is naturally attached to, and I'm not, this isn't just you, you're only a minority block on the Buffalo
Exactly,
School Board.
exactly.
I could not quite say that the Buffalo School Board is progressive. So Mr. Bowman speaks of these things being pushed by progressive teachers, by progressive unions, by activists like Kathy here, and people very interested in children who have children in school, like Keith Jones. And the Buffalo Board of Education is like a dinosaur
Well,
sitting
you know,
there.
people
the-
want to maintain the status quo.
Well, the
And
state's
that-
quo in Buffalo School Board also means a pretty racist one, too. So how do you get past from the Buffalo School Board and helping children to Mr. Bowman and being progressive?
Well, you know, as Jamal was saying, it's incremental. You know, certainly when we
I
started.
mean, like 100-year incremental steps?
Well, I hope not that slow, not that slowly, but we do have an election coming up this year. And so there's a promise of new board members.
There's a promise
and
of
returning
stagnation.
of
What,
some
got
of the
17
other
people
members.
running in this election?
I don't know at this point, and you know, until they actually get their petitions in and are validated, they're not candidates. So we have people out there getting petitions at this point in time. But you know, there are people on the board right now, and even as a minority group, you know, we're vocal, we're active.
Well, the minority
we're-
group is
and
great,
we're- and
but
we're
you've
pushing.
got these trolls in the minority, led by somebody named Carl Palladino.
But we always have to deal with those. In any movement, we always have to deal with people who are not progressive, who want to push back, who want to stop, you know, anything that's positive. And so we continue to address it because what's the alternative? Is not.
Can
Is
I-
to do
can I-
nothing.
can also jump in. So recently, we've had a new chancellor of the Board of Regents elected, Dr. Betty Rosa, who's a lifelong educator, and she is very progressive. She takes a child-centered approach, a whole child approach, a community schools approach, and she's very progressive. So that's a light at the end of the tunnel. And the opt-out movement was very instrumental in helping her to get elected and helping the overall transformation of the Board of Regents, because many have stepped down and others have gotten voted in because of the movement. So Betty is very progressive.
So that's a
and I'm
light- that's a shining star.
That's a huge shining star, and I think.
Did she visit around the state at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And I predict in the next 1 to 3 years, you're going to see huge transformation in public schools throughout the state to a more progressive agenda.
How will they get by local school boards?
Well, doesn't the policy or part of the policy come from the Board of Regents at the state level?
I don't know, that's
Yes.
why I'm asking.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes,
I
it
believe
is.
so.
But for Buffalo, one of the difficulties is the state takeover of our schools, receivership, which eliminates the role of the school board altogether in terms of what happens to the schools.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a very bad thing, because
Okay.
what we need is we need to strengthen the quality of democracy, which means we need to have the parents and teachers and students being the ones to decide. One of the elements of the movement we have here is that demand. These are our schools, it's our rights, and we decide. We know what's best for all children, and we can do a much better curriculum. At the meeting on Saturday, that's clear. All people had all kinds of very positive ideas of how we can improve the schools and what we can do differently, and how
Is
we
this coming
can
from
provide the
parents or
parents.
coming from teachers and school boards?
No.
Is this really like down at the bottom, like from the bottom up?
The opt-out
Here
movement?
in Buffalo, I would
Every
say
movement,
generally,
yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's parents.
Yes, it's most, and it's students too, because
Mm-hmm.
we were asking before, one of the things that people can do is, as students, you have the right to refuse. Ask your parents to sign the letter. It's a very simple process. Have them
Mm-hmm.
sign a letter, give it to the principal. Some of the schools, the main reason they had opt-out is because 1 or 2 students talked to all the rest of the students and encouraged them to take
But you're
that
saying
position.
this is from like 3rd grade to 8th grade. Aren't these pretty young people? Like I'm trying to remember from my own days in school. I won't say how long ago that's been, that's another story. But it would seem to me that 8th graders, you're talking about maybe kids, 12, 13 years old?
Yeah.
And that's kind of, isn't that a heavy load to put on
Well,
people that
think
young?
about the 3rd graders. I mean, they're 8 years old, right? They're 8 years old, and they're sitting for 9 hours 9 hours total, and sometimes 18 hours if they have special needs. So that's the point. They're developmentally inappropriate, and they're administered in a way that's more detrimental to the lifelong learning of the child. We cultivate and we advocate for the cultivation of lifelong learning and the joy of learning and life and just existence. And right now, what's happening in schools is because of the over-testing is leading to a standardized curriculum and a standardized way of teaching. So teachers have become handcuffed and they can't meet the individual needs of the children in their class. They're forcing a standard that they're not ready for down the throats of the children. And now the children don't, as they get older, they love learning and love school less and less.
Well, Mr. Jones, now Keith Jones, you are a part of 2 parent groups. And Kathy, you're a part of 1 parent
No,
group.
I go both. I do both as well.
Okay, so you're both. So what are you doing in your parent group?
Well,
I know
excuse
some
me.
parent groups are not as good as others. I shouldn't say that, but I am, and if they don't like it, they can do about it. But I'm saying this, you know.
Well, like I said, it's like I'm on the executive board with BPTO,
Tell us who that is.
Buffalo Parent Teachers Organization.
Okay, that's part of you.
Yeah, that's one. Yeah, and then I'm a parent
That's when right,
facilitator.
Mr. Bowman, I think.
Yeah, and then I'm a parent facilitator for DPCC,
What's that?
District Parent Coordinating Council, commit, whatever. But anyway, then I'm on certain other organizations on executive boards with them. But the thing is that the parents are not being informed because there's for some reason, what Buffalo Evening News has a lot to do with it too. This conflict. They're trying to make the parent organizations go against each other.
So you have a major enemy in Buffalo's one big newspaper. That's Buffalo News.
Yeah, well, they
That could be a problem, I
they
would
the only
think.
newspaper, and then they cater to Carl Palladino. I said I wasn't gonna say his name, but who cares?
Then you told a lie.
But I mean, every now and then. But see, the thing is the paper is so slanted. They never say anything about the positives that's going on inside. Like they want to make sure every school is a failing school. Like people might see I got a shirt that says investor, and that's for School 53. But they want to keep saying this school is this, school is that, school is this. But like out of the past 2-3 years, our 8th grade class might be about 30-something kids. At least 15 of them is going into the criteria-based schools. So how's this a failing district? But that will never get publicized. There's always, failing schools, this, failing schools that. At this building I'm talking about, the majority of the one that's on the Buffalo Board of Education, Quinn, Carl, Pierce, Sampson, McCarthy, hello if y'all watching, they will take out all the support. Like 53, we have a special ed, a section for special eds in there, but we have no student support. They took out the sociologists, the psychologists, and everything. Tell them they can come in for 6 hours a month. But if a kid, yes, but if a kid have a meltdown, but it's all their buildings. Matter of fact, they took a guidance counselor, the social worker, and everything else, took them out of School 53, put them out in the South District, which y'all know whose district that is.
Yeah, Carl Palladino.
They have two of everything. But
But, if I could just say, just in terms of what the parents, and again, we talked
Do you
about
belong
this
to
being
any
a
of these
parents'
organizations,
movement.
Barbara? Can you belong to any of them? Or can you
I can
attend their
attend them.
she
meetings?
can attend
The
all of them.
meetings are
She'd
certainly
be at
open.
meetings.
The
So.
meetings are certainly
She can
open.
she can be a member of the
But,
BPTO.
yeah,
Oh, yeah,
what I
BPTO,
want to say
yeah.
is that, this is really kind of indicative in terms of how parents in urban districts, in large urban districts in the state, are communicated with regarding the opt-out. There's a narrative that you have to take the test.
Which
You
is
have
false.
to take the test is good for you. As a matter of fact, if your child doesn't take the test, they're going to contribute to the failing statistics in the schools. So the parents, I think, in the suburban districts seem to have more information, seem to be, certainly they're more engaged. And so this is, again, an opportunity for us to communicate with, to educate, to provide really open dialogue, opportunities for dialogue with parents in the urban districts, which have not, at this point, really been engaged as much in this movement as we'd like to see. And so, this is part of what, thank goodness for this program that you're helping us to do.
Mr. Brown, I was going to ask you, one, can people reach you if, like, say parents are listening now and they want to know how to reach you in the Bronx or whatever? And the second thing I want to know, do you attend any of these parent-teacher meetings?
I do in the Bronx,
In the Bronx.
and in New York City.
And you
I'm not in Buffalo as
Right, but I
much.
want to know if you attended any
Not
of these
yet.
meetings too.
Oh, here in Buffalo.
No, in the Bronx.
Oh,
and
yeah,
New York
all over the city.
You do attend these
Correct.
parent-teacher movements?
I engage with parents all over New York City around these issues because, again, this is, to Dr. Nevergold's point, our communities of color, low-income communities of color, are always the last to know and the least informed. So I think it's my duty as someone who's worked in these communities my entire career and grew up in these communities to inform everyone so they are empowered, again, with information. You can reach me. should I share my information
Yes,
now?
I want you
Absolutely.
to before we lose you,
Yeah.
so that if people want to nag you or want to cuss you out
Absolutely.
or whatever they want to do,
Absolutely.
they can know how to reach you.
So my email address is, my name is Jamal A. Bowman at gmail.com. So that's JAMAALABOWMAN at gmail.com. I don't know if parents or anyone's on Twitter. I tweet a lot, so I'm at Jamal A. Bowman, name spelled the same way. So the best way to reach me is via email. I wanted to also make a point about the underfunding of public schools.
That's a good point.
So many of our public schools throughout the state are underfunded. I believe to the tune of about $4.9 billion, based on the
See,
campaign.
that number is so big, I'm having a hard time imagining it.
Yeah.
I imagine $1 billion would cover the floor in this room.
Exactly. So based on the
High.
based on a campaign for fiscal equity lawsuit that was ruled upon 10 years ago, the state still hasn't paid public schools the $4.9 billion that it owes.
How
So
can they be made to do that? I
Good
mean, like
question.
this right here?
that's a
Good
good
question.
that's a
Good question.
great question, and I know the Alliance for Quality Education does a lot of work in this area, and they have a website where you could go acquire information. But so the schools that are being starved the most are the ones that are ultimately placed in receivership, because they're the ones that are not performing on the tests, that are not age appropriate anyway, right? And then once these schools are ultimately closed, private investors are allowed to come in, transition a school from a public to a charter, and then make their money back within a 7-year period based on the new market tax credit.
Repeat that again. Just I want to say it slow so that our audience
Okay.
can really understand what you just said, which I think is an extremely good point.
So public schools have been, a lawsuit was filed by the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, and it was ruled upon 10 years ago, right? That lawsuit determines that the state has not funded public schools adequately to provide a safe, sound and basic education. Thank you. The money has not been paid out for over a 10-year period. A decade. Many of those schools ultimately end up in receivership because they're not performing on these standardized assessments. Now, in theory, if the money was provided, the schools would have the additional resources so they could perform better on these assessments or any other assessments, right? So the state is starving the schools ultimately end up on receivership and possibly closed. Then private funding comes into play. A charter school may be opened, and now the private investors receive, based on the new market tax credit, receive 39% tax relief over a 7-year period, which leads to the doubling of their money. This is a federal law that's in
Tell
place.
me if I'm wrong, and talk me down, or tell me I'm wrong if I'm saying this sounds pretty deliberate to me.
It's very deliberate.
Yeah.
And that's
Correct.
part of the whole situation. It's very deliberate wrecking of education, and it's very deliberate elimination of local and public control of our schools.
And the
And
elim-
Buffalo has 2 schools already on that. West Hurdle, where Commissioner Leah went, and Futures. Both of them had 1 year for improvement, as they call it, and then they can be now turned over as soon as July, I believe. She can make a decision, but at the end of the school year, she can say these can go to a private charter school or receiver. And it does, and it's totally up to her. It's not, the school board doesn't get a say in that, and the public doesn't get a say in that. So we are fighting very hard on that score, because it's wrong. It's our schools. We should be able to decide, and we must decide in the situation, or they're going to follow the path of New Orleans. There's not a single public school left in New Orleans today
We're going
for
to lose
this same
Dr.
thing.
Or Mr. Jamal Bowman in about 5 minutes, so I want to give him the last
word.
minute here to say what he's got to
Yes, do
say.
that.
Enlighten us. We need some pearls of wisdom.
No, I just wanted to also relay the message that the more charter schools open, the weaker teacher unions become, because many charter schools don't have teacher unions, and there's a de-unionization going on in every industry throughout the country.
Particularly public service.
Yes.
Public service unions, whether it's post office or anything else like that. There's been a whole movement to cripple public service union. And a lot of people don't realize this, but this is where many of your rights come out of.
That's
And
right.
in fact, almost the entire black middle class was built on the post office.
Correct.
You know, and these are certain things that we
And
need.
both
to
my
kind of think about.
parents and my stepmom all worked in the post office.
Yeah.
So I was able to receive a middle class upbringing because my parents worked in the post office.
In the post office, a lot of people don't understand, and the post office has been under horrific thing, and the teachers' unions, because the teaching is so active, have come under things. This is where you got to fight hard, and it's people say, oh yeah, you always want to talk about union. All unions haven't been good, right? All unions have not always been good. We have a lot of company unions, but I just simply come out of a union family, and this is where I like when I can help them, and especially teachers and public service workers. I do my best.
That's right.
So we want to hear from you. Any other words you're going to drop on us before you? When you come back to Buffalo, that's one thing. You do. When are you getting on?
We'll let you know.
Sometime in May.
And no, for the record, I have nothing to do with that.
I do. I will keep bringing him back.
So,
I'll
sometime
keep
in May.
communicating with him the way we do, the way we always do, because it's a pleasure meeting him. I met this brother, about 3 weeks ago, maybe.
Yep.
And you would think we knew each other.
The DDP or whatever?
No. We met him. It was when he came here. A lot of things with DPCC. I'm just,
Bradford's union.
yeah, we're not a union. That's his organization, but
Right, so I'm sure
we all
he
don't
will
think the
look
same
like
way.
him.
We all don't.
Of course he does. Why would
No,
you
we
not
don't think the same
that
way.
you do?
No, we don't. We
That
don't.
can't
We don't.
be true. I
Yeah,
don't
well,
believe
it's
it.
true. It's
Of
true.
course not. You can say
Yes,
some of this is
yes,
true.
yes. But we're gonna let Jamal have that, and we'll keep communicating
Yes.
because, and then anytime he can come back, he know he's welcome back.
I just want to, last thing I want to say is the parent voice is the most important voice in public education. And our parents need to be empowered with information, and they need to be empowered with the imagination to provide a new vision for what could take place in our schools for our kids. If they have it in the wealthy communities, our kids can have it too. Now we have to work together to figure out how to make that happen. So when we talk about whole child education, that's what we're talking about.
And who are we talking to today? Tell us who you are.
Jamal Bowman, principal of Cornerstone Academy Middle School and father of 3.
Great. And we're very happy to have you here.
Thank
Please
you.
come back.
I will.
And I'm not always a troll. I can be much nicer generally, but I'm not aggravated.
Okay. Thank you so much.
And you're welcome. And he's going to leave us for now. We'll continue our information. Barbara?
Yes.
Okay. I thought you were telling me you wanted to say something. I was letting you get in here.
No, I was trying to say my goodbyes to Jamal.
Oh, okay. He's waving from off camera goodbye. And I'm sure they'll be in touch.
Yes, like I said, probably later
This
on
one,
today.
does this ever come up in the school board meetings, Barbara?
Well, actually, not to a great extent, not as much as I would like. I mean, I think that when I look at what's happening with some of the other school boards across the state, I see school boards that are actively discussing the issue of opt-out and actually supporting it through resolutions where the entire board supports it. We've tried to bring it up here to have a conversation because
But this
the
board
has
is
to be
far more
informed as well.
conservative. You got a majority on your board who's, say, not quite as progressive as what Mr. Bowman was talking
It's
about.
not the progression or lack thereof, it's the information that I think that board members have not been informed enough to really understand what is happening with the tests and how the tests are misused with our children, and then how our schools are mislabeled as a result of these flawed tests. And so there is a tendency to buy in to the narrative that is ongoing. Plus, there's a support for charter schools among certain members of the board. And so their thrust and their belief is that we should have more charter schools
and less public
and
schools.
less public schools, right?
I wonder who's going to teach all these kids.
Buffalo actually has one of the highest percentage of charter schools already compared to other districts in the state. And one of the things that takes place is the charter schools don't perform better than
Any
the public
better.
schools in general. You know, there's always some exceptions, just like there's
But
some
some
public
people
schools
can make
that do
money, and
better.
we just might, charter schools, many of them, I'm not going to say all, I don't know, but many of them are strictly for profit and are people who can make money off of them. And it has nothing to do with the interest of the children who go there. Because if there was, then children who may have a little bit more trouble than others wouldn't get kicked out and thrown back into the public
Well,
schools.
certainly.
And just think about what would happen if the movement that certain people want here to dismantle the public school system.
What person is that?
Well, I'm gonna just say the board majority, and maybe some of the people up in Albany or whatever. There's a movement to try to
He's not
dismantle.
falling into my traps.
No, well, I mean, I'm gonna address him on Wednesdays at board meetings.
Do you go to these board meetings too? Are you?
Yes, I do. I regularly speak up at the board meetings, and actually it's been interesting because both Keith and I have faced difficulties because we strive to speak to the issues like this, and also I am personally, I strive, I think the board meetings, the school board meetings where the public is allowed to speak, which is not very much, we get 3 minutes, is actually a meeting for the public to be engaged in this discussion as well. And so I face the public. I don't know if you've been to a school board, but if the podium faces the school board instead of the public. So I turn around and I face the public and try to have that discussion because I think that's who is actually going to make the changes. It's the parents and teachers there.
Members of the school board, any members of the school board, I'm thinking about the minority members now. I think it would help these people at all in these difficulties they say they have sometimes with speaking their minds or saying
Oh,
things.
you mean, well, I mean, there's a policy regarding speakers, and then, and there's an attempt to change that policy to limit the access to public comment for the public. And so, yes, we are very definitely minority members opposed to limiting any of the
So
access.
you try to help as
because of-
much as you can, basically.
Well, I mean, I think we do quite a good job because even though the policy takes 5 people, we are able to really bring the issue to the table, have full discussion, complete discussion, and such, that it's back down some of the votes on those issues that would be negative and would be, detrimental to the whole thing of public speaking and free speech, as a matter of fact.
Is there a danger in Buffalo of suddenly finding out that there's no opposition on the school board? And I say this really in not a bad way, but as something that is maybe very important, that if the board goes certain ways, like people kind of think they might, would there be a danger of public education in the city of Buffalo at all?
Well, I believe so. I mean, I think after the new board majority took office in 2014, they issued a statement, a vision statement, in which they actually did spell out what their vision was, and their vision certainly was to have more charter schools. I mean, if you talk about Mr. Palladino, and I will mention his name at this point because I want to quote him, he has said that his mission is to dismantle or disassemble the school district and then reconstruct it with charter schools, with parochial schools, with alliances with private schools, etc.
And public schools don't seem to be mentioned at all here.
No,
I
not
mean,
with
when
him.
you want to, as a school board member, you want to dismantle or disassemble the
Public-
school board
Yeah, I've never
or
heard
the
this in
schools.
the United
I mean,
States.
that's
Who's supposed to educate them? How many public school students are in the public school? Would you say 70,000?
no 30,
About 30,
35,000.
35, somewhere around
So
there.
then, what would you do? I don't think that there are enough charter, parochial, or private schools to educate 30,000 kids. And I'm saying this because all these kids cannot say pay. And it's mainly what charter schools would do. And I'm wondering why he mentioned this progressive new commissioner on Regents. Would Regents allow this?
That's a good question.
That's a very good
That's a very
question.
good
Because the
question.
Board of Regents does approve the
Does
different
approve,
charters, and
yeah.
so they have.
Yeah.
But certainly, I think there is the fear, and as Kathy said, we have the greatest percentage of charter schools already in the district, and I know that there are applications for several more. And because there is the opportunity for charters to handpick their students, there is the possibility of having again a 2-tiered system.
Or you'd have no
With-
system, you'd have no tiers at all. You'd have charter schools, and you'd have a lot of other children who are not going to
Who
school
would not go
at
to charter
all.
schools, or who would not go to charter schools because they weren't acceptable. And so, I mean, it's public education. We have the responsibility providing
But I'm
education
saying,
for those
if
children.
public education is gone, is dismantled, where would these kids go?
The prison.
always
the,
be
the
prison.
charter schools do accept
The prison.
various. Prison is one thing, the military is the other thing, and
But this, to me, is
It's-
outrageous in this country.
Yes.
Well,
and the
that's
other thing about it is the it's an effort to destroy the district as a district. So right now you have a district that's centralized, and you have a place that you can go, the school board, to protest, say things, and once the elimination of the district as a district takes place, and that's already in motion with the receivership schools, that's part of what it's about. Then you end up like it is in New Orleans, which is each parent has to go and apply to each separate different school, and maybe they'll get accepted or maybe they won't. And it's a huge difficulty, and there's no place for you to go because the charter schools aren't accountable to the public. They're accountable to their whatever their private interests are. They get public dollars, they take our public tax dollars, but they're not accountable to the public.
This is terrible. I worry a lot about that. That would be awful.
Well, we're very concerned about that as well. I mean, certainly the receivership issue at this point has much higher priority than the issue of charter schools, although certainly all of this is linked and intertwined. But as has been said, the fact that we have 25 schools that have been identified initially out of our 55 schools, 56 schools for receivership, that's almost half. And the superintendent initially has receivership authority. He is solely the decider, if you would, for anything going on in those schools. The board does not have the authority.
Well,
to make
when we
that.
first came here, there was a lot of hype about what kind of like a savior this was going to be. It's going to be the White Knight riding in. I have heard very little, certainly very little that's extraordinarily positive about our new superintendent.
And
And I'm trying to find out, is there anything
well,
really positive to
let me say in terms of receivership, because I don't want to leave the impression that he made that decision on his own. That was a decision that was imposed as a result of a law that was passed by the state. But he has pushed receivership to be the model for the state, because there are other receivership districts throughout the state, and Buffalo is much further along and the superintendent trying to exercise his power as a receiver. So we have a lot of things going on in this district, a lot of balls in the air, if you would. And we're trying to catch some, we're trying to bat some out of the way, we're trying to redirect others.
This seems like an awful situation.
Well, and the Dr. Cash, the superintendent, was handpicked by our commissioner, Elia, and she's very much in favor of pursuing the receivership because she had the choice. She didn't have to put any schools on the receivership list, and she did.
The region director, he was talking about this, the chairman of the board, that she's so progressive. Doesn't she have anything to say?
You're the chancellor?
She just started.
Yeah.
That election of the new chancellor is about 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
So she has not had an opportunity to put her stamp on, but again, her remarks and her record, as a regent, I think she's been on the region for about 5 years, gives us every belief and indication that she is going to change the direction in which the state ed was moving. But it will take her some time, certainly.
The commissioner is appointed by the Board of Regents. That's who appoints her.
Okay.
But in the current situation, so she did say Chancellor Rosa said that she would opt out for children, so that people should know that that's an important stand that she's taking and as an educator. And but the commissioner turned around right away and came here to Buffalo, and particularly, as well as the suburbs. So when she was in the suburbs, West Seneca, she didn't tell them to opt out. To take the test. West Seneca has a 77%, something like that. They don't even administer the test because so many of them opt out. But when she came to Buffalo, she pushed really hard that Buffalo students have to take these state tests. And specifically West Hurdle, the school I was mentioning, that could be closed, could be privatized. That's the one she chose to go to and push this whole thing. And even I'm sure she had a role to play in the principal then having a rally at the school for taking the test. And so it's really not fair to the parents and students there.
Rally or whatever successful?
Well, I haven't heard that part of the story from the parents, which is who I would like to hear it from, and the students who were there. But just doing that is really unfair to those parents because one should have full information and be able, without pressure or coercion, to make the choice you want to make. And that's, you should be free to choose. It is a choice that the parents have the right to make, not the school and not the commissioner, but the parents. And so part of what's going on is an effort to silence the parents and to silence folks like us who are calling for people to opt out. And in the name of these tests are better, or I believe she also said these tests can be used for planning for educational purposes. They cannot. They are not used by anyone in that manner. You don't even get the test back until August or September. And so the kids who took the test in your class have already gone on to the next grade. You can't, there's no connection between the tests and educational planning and development, none. That's just being promoted to try and convince parents to take the test.
One good thing, though, is that your movement is moving. The opt-out
Yes.
movement is coming along.
Absolutely. I mean, I believe that last year there were 240,000 children who refused the test, and the movement is looking for even greater. Up to now, 240,000 children is
That's a lot of kids.
20% of the children throughout the state. That's a major statement. And believe me, the governor heard. The governor heard. If he had not, he would not have moved to make some changes that he did in terms of looking at Common Core and how it was implemented, and looking at the test and putting a moratorium on the use of the test results. But even there's just a lot of movement, a lot of questions still that have to be answered, and so the movement can't stop and sit back now and say, okay, we've done our job. That's why people are not satisfied that the response has been total, the response has been honest, the response has been, really listening to everything the parents have been concerned about.
This is really, and now I know with this coming election, somebody is retiring.
Ms. Kapsiak
Yeah.
in Central is
Is
retiring.
Central, and she's
Yes.
retired. And now, are there any other challengers because her seat vying for that seat that you know of?
There are 3 challengers for
Yeah.
that seat.
And I don't know without naming names, and I'm certainly going to ask you to do that. Would you say that most would be a change for Central, or that 1 or 2 out of the 3 would not be a change for Central? So instead of a 4-member minority, they would be down to 3.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. I'll answer
Yes,
that one.
okay.
So she don't have to be on there because she's a board member. That as a parent and person that be down there, yes, 2 of the candidates, I believe, well, one I already know is his friend is a bully, and the other one is kind of there. But the third one I just met today would be, but it would definitely be a change in the board because Carl has got his hands on this election already. He's putting people out there, having people, align with him that they think we don't know, and they're aligning themselves with him, and he's trying to put his hands in there so he can get done what he wants to have done. But as long as I have a breath in my body, I would not let that man do what he want to do, because it's not for the children. It's for him. He's trying to sabotage everything. All that man think about is his pocket. And our children are not. Our children is not a business, and that's what he's thinking. I was at a board meeting where Quinn called us customers. He kept calling us customers. What is you selling us? But that was a cold word for something else that he was really wanted to call us, but he wasn't man enough to say it.
Well, Barbara, what would happen to anything that the minority right now is trying to do if your minority was cut down to 3?
Ooh, I would hate that.
I mean, certainly when you look at the direction that the district might go with respect to change in the number of public schools,
You're
the
probably
change over
effectively
to
gone. You
charter
don't have any
schools.
power at all.
Well, I don't subscribe to being totally powerless, because I think as long as you have a voice, I think as long as you are continue to advocate, that you have power. And so I'm going to see, we're going to work really hard in this election to assist candidates who will support the agenda for the children. And we hope that the community is going to be listening, looking, educating themselves, understanding what's at stake, and that they're going to vote for the agenda for the children.
Let me also add that the school board's not the only force at play here, because the parents, teachers, and students are organizing,
Yeah.
mobilizing, have accomplished quite a bit. We've taken a very strong stand against the receivership and are not, ready to let any of these schools be turned over to private interests, and are going to continue organizing and fighting. And I think that's something, together with the positive forces on the school board, we're in a position to grow and increase our power, you could say, as a force here in Buffalo. And the number of different meetings we've had lately, and the more parents, like the meeting we just had on Saturday, had a whole number of new people coming and joining and ready to say, okay, we're going to opt out, we're going to stand with you on this. And I think that's the direction things are going in Buffalo. And as long as we keep organizing and fighting, we'll be in a good position.
We're going to go around just one more time before our program is running down. I want to give each of our guests here tonight to get a little bit more of what their opinions might be in the next minute. So the question I want to ask you is, of course, what do you think, and in a way I think it will affect education in a way even on a national level, about the current situation in the national election, as far as you feel that it might impact education at all?
Well, the issues that we've been talking about here today, and I don't know if I can address the national election, but the issues that we're addressing here today regarding the educational concerns that we have, particularly around testing, standardized testing, loss of public education, are really national issues.
And it hasn't been much talk about it.
Buffalo's a microcosm, perhaps, but we really represent what's happening across this country, and it's an effort to privatize public education.
Get rid of
So
public education
regardless of who is in the White House, we have to look at this as really a grassroots, in your backyard, but also it's impacted because it's going everywhere.
What about you, Keith? I just wanted to ask you, because I see what's going on nationally, because I haven't heard that much about education in the discourse, the national discourse. And as we're listening tonight, education is playing a major role in the United States. How can you maintain yourself as a superpower and a great nation, and you have an uneducated populace,
Well,
basically speaking?
one thing like the national picture is education is under attack. But the funniest thing I was watching the other day, and the funniest thing is divisive and as crazy as Donald Trump is. Donald Trump want to get rid of Common Core. So if he wanted, as a plus, but it also shows me that there's something wrong with this Common Core as a curriculum. So if you have someone like that that's willing to do, that's the only good thing he done said, but I can agree with, because it's even though we trying to do it here, I know I have relatives in other states and stuff, and everywhere, and I talk to people, everybody's against Common Core because the way they did it, and they see that it's not real. They don't question teachers or nothing for these exams. It's like they got some private entities that's going to make a test for our children, and our children need better than that.
What about you, Kathy?
Well, I think the national situation actually mirrors the local situation in the sense that we don't get to decide. Like, I'm pretty sure all of us would choose different candidates than most of the ones that are running if we had the opportunity. But the process is so difficult to do that. For a president, it's billions of dollars that are required. The only reason Trump can run is because he's a billionaire. Otherwise, that wouldn't be happening. And so I think the issue of decision making, who decides, and that the power needs to reside with us. We need to fight to organize, to empower ourselves here at the local level in relation to education. Same with the national level. We need to change the electoral process so we can have our own candidates. So I think that's important, and I just wanted to encourage those of you interested in opting out or have more questions. We have a hotline, 716-602-8077 if you'd like to call.
I thought you were going to give out my number.
Well, I want to say I was glad I wanted to bring it toward the end, because I don't think that education has been put front and center nationally.
Yeah.
I think it should be front and center nationally, and there hasn't been as much talking about it. So I wanted to make sure that we sort of got a little of that in.
Hopefully this movement is going on in other states and cities.
It definitely is all across the country.
So.
And I'm just glad that we kind of brought it up here a little bit today, and talked about it a bit. And we're running down on our program, so I'm being told I need to wind it up and say so long to my guest. And then just a minute, I want to thank Dr. Nevergold for being here. Wish her well.
I want to
And
thank you
also
for having us here.
Thank you, and Keith Jones, wish you well too.
Thank
Don't,
you.
Don't slug anybody one of these meetings. and Kathy, want to thank you too.
I'm not
And
that
I'm your
bad.
host, Mary Davis. Stay with the station throughout your evening.